As part of the museum's move from Church Lane to Park Street, we knew we had to have some form of extra grant funding. So we applied for a national lottery grant, which we achieved. That has to have a theme. So the decision was made to base the lottery grant on the release of the 1921 census. So that gave us a 100-year window to go back into Chatteris history. We wanted to look very much at the whole town, from the humblest small farm dwellings, agricultural workers, right up towards the major employers of the town, like the engineering works. To examine that data from the 1921 census, we decided to start a small mini project which we called Who Lived in My House? We invited people into the museum, and with the aid of a huge map of Chatteris dating from the 1920s, people were able to plot their property, some of which just simply lived in a field on the map, but with others we could then examine the history of their property, and in particular look at who lived in that house 100 years ago. Using that information, we decided to make this short film of some of the places in Chatteris that we discovered through the research of the 1921 census. Chatteris War Memorial was constructed in 1920 to commemorate the 158 men who lost their lives during the Great War of 1914 to 1918. When you scan those names, how do you choose just one? John Dighton, a gunner in the Royal Garrison Artillery who was killed in July 1917, came to us through a photograph of his wife and children who lived in Chapel Lane. Standing here in Chapel Lane, just off Bridge Street in Chatteris, you can see behind me a white cottage. It was originally two homes, a single downstairs room and single bedroom above, with a small scullery just behind. Living here during the First World War was Ada Dayton and her children. Her husband John had been conscripted in 1916 and was serving in the Royal Garrison Artillery. He was killed in 1917. Ada would have received a war gratuity to see her through before her war widow's pension was enabled. In January of 1919, that pension was finally settled and she was receiving 36 shillings and threepence per week, which equates to £1.82 today. John, as an agricultural labourer at the time before the war, would have been earning an average wage of about £1 to £1.25 a week. Ada, in 1921, from the census details we have, was living here with her 7 children and her widowed mother. When looking at the cottage today, at the far end, you perhaps just see the bricked up front door of the original 2 cottages that stood here. And they represent many of the houses for the agricultural labourers in Chatteris, of sometimes 2 rooms down, 2 rooms up, but many of them were a single room on the ground floor and a single room upstairs. The building you see behind you across the road was originally constructed as the Corn Exchange. This is where farmers in the 19th century would have met to discuss and sell their crops to the merchants. In 1910, the building was repurposed as a picture palace and has always been known by Chatteris people simply as the Palace. Michael Williams opened his picture palace in 1910 and continued there until replaced by the Emperor Cinema in Park Street. It was later used as a dance hall and was well known throughout East Anglia because of its specially sprung dance floor. We know the house was built for a retired farmer in the late 1840s. It was later rented by Dr. O'Connor before being sold to the Clark family. William Clark was the manager of Gurney's Bank, then situated in Bridge Street. The house was occupied as a family home and was later sold to Gurney's Bank on the provision that William Clark could remain living there. A small annex was added to the side of the building, which then became the branch of the bank. Eventually, Gurney's Bank was taken over by Barclays, and Sir William Clark then moved out, and in 1923 it became the first branch of Barclays Bank in Chatteris. After the First World War, it was the Prime Minister, Lloyd George, who coined the phrase "a land fit for heroes", and changes in the 1919 Housing Act enabled local authorities to begin purchasing land for the building of council houses. In Chatteris, 4 locations were selected: York Road, Bridge Street, Tuck's Gate, which is the corner down Wenny Road, and here in Wood Street, where it's proposed to build 22 houses. The first land was purchased in September 1920, and a housing survey in that year revealed that Chatteris had 1,277 homes. Astonishingly, 576 of those homes were deemed to be either in a bad state of repair or uninhabitable. When these first 22 houses were constructed, 49 families immediately signed up to live here. According to information on the 1921 census, Chatteris Engineering Works behind me was the largest single employer of men and women in Chatteris. It started life in the mid-19th century as the Eagle Foundry, but then into the 1880s and 1890s started to specialise in providing huge ore crushing plants for the South African diamond mining industry. Their construction of huge ore crushing plants for South Africa meant that they were first fabricated here, then deconstructed and moved across to the railway for shipment to South Africa. During the First World War, the engineering works became a munitions factory, manufacturing shells of all differing calibers. At the end of the First World War, with the decline in industry, they began to specialise in travelling cranes. Some of these could be very large indeed. These 60-foot lengths of steel crane would be moved across on a small truck, manhandled by many men, sometimes aided with horses. The railway line had to be stopped because it would take sometimes over an hour or two to manoeuvre these huge pieces of steel over the railway line. We're standing on the site of the old railway line, which now forms a busy link road around Chatteris. Originally opened in February 1848, this line completed the links from Cambridge through St Ives to March and Peterborough. It was a twin-track line with the main station across to my left, where the conifers are situated now. About a mile further down from here, behind me, was the location of the sidings and the Chatteris docks. The line closed to passenger traffic in March 1967, with the docks closing previously in December 1955. We're now standing on the Chatteris bank of the 40-foot drain. We're at the end of what was known as Dock Road. Many people in the town would then begin to wonder, well, where were these docks? How extensive were they and what were they for? Behind me, you'll see the bridge now carrying the A140, which was, until 1967, the railway line linking St Ives to March. Adjacent to that were some sidings with a couple of very large sheds, which then came down to the water's edge and provided this dock. Further behind the bridge, now long gone, was one of the original windmills used for draining the fens. As wind power transferred to steam power, there was the need to get the coal onto these waterways to then feed the new pumping engines. So the docks here primarily were for the delivering of coal into barges to then move up the waterways and supply those pumping stations. Obviously that had a return journey, so crops began to be transported down the waterways back to the docks. They were then loaded into wagons and taken away onto the railway system. Most of the crops coming back here were mangels, so in other words turnips, which were going towards the Midlands, and potatoes that were then going down to the London markets. There were staff within what was known as the docks. There was a turntable to move the wagons round, and it was difficult to actually get a locomotive to work in this environment, so all the wagons were moved by horse. We're not sure of the actual date that the docks were constructed, but we do know when they closed. They finally closed to all traffic in December of 1955. And now, when you stand here, there is absolutely no trace whatsoever of it next to that busy road.